Good afternoon, all. While we wait for a few more people to arrive, please, you can see the today's order of presentation. It will be a presentation from myself, the Program Manager of the CEnvP scheme, Paul Corrigan, and then followed on with a discussion between CEnvP board member Joanne Flint and some select CEnVPs from the scheme's different certifications. Please, while we're waiting for, I know there's a bit of an issue with a couple of registrations coming through from through the EINZ events program. So while we wait for those to join, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we can do that as we go along. We'll monitor those, and any questions that can be answered at the time we will, or appropriate time later in the presentation or at the discussion later. Otherwise, we'll take them on notice and respond with a full answer to all those who have registered when we send through the information pack post session. Can I get a thumbs up from someone to make sure that I can be heard? Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Rebecca. Hope everyone's having some nice weather where they are joining from. I am in Melbourne, and we have a day that is not raining. Okay, it doesn't look like anyone else is are looking to join at the moment. We'll let them in as they come along. I'll start. I'd like to start by first acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we are sitting today. The CEnvP office itself is located on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to their elders past, present, as well as persons of all First Nations that may be joining today, and also from the broad lands, I guess, that everyone's tuning in from across Australia, New Zealand, and abroad. On to the discussion today. I'll just through. So the agenda will be a bit about the CEnvP scheme itself, regulatory drivers, certification types, certification process, application process. For most part, all certifications follow a similar 5-step process, regardless of the intricacies of each certification type, and then followed up from an insights after about 20 or so minutes from Joe, as I mentioned, Julie and Luke from the certification scheme practitioners. As noted here, there's a chat function there, and please post your questions via the chat function, and we will aim to answer them during the session. Otherwise, we'll follow up post-webinar. The purpose of the CEnvP scheme is to serve the environmental and social professional community and deliver a trusted and leading certification scheme that provides an independent mechanism to demonstrate the professional skills and high standards of conduct. The CEnvP scheme itself is governed by a board of volunteers, a 7-member board, and my role as a program manager is to deliver on the the plan and the strategy of the CEnvP board, and there is a team of staff that work through the program processes and works with an amazing range of volunteers. Hundreds of volunteers support the scheme throughout each year to guide the application process. Little background on the scheme. The Environment Institute of Australia and New Zealand, Inc., EINZ, launched the scheme in 2004 to certify environmental practitioners. There's outside of academic institutions, there was a need to certify the skills and experience of practitioners of their time in practice, and also to meet the community demand for greater environmental accountability from industry and government. The scheme operates under a couple of different standards and bylaws. We're governed by a bylaw of the EINZ, bylaw 16, and also we follow the ISO 17024, and that is for the requirements for bodies operating certifications of persons. And the certification board is responsible for decisions of the scheme, including the certifications of persons. And unlike many other certification schemes, this scheme, because it is based on the ISO, is available to anyone who meets the criteria of the certification. And that's irrespective of membership of any other association. It focuses on the person and the merits that have got them to where they are now. And also an important one as we increase our work, I guess, for regulators, is that in 2017 the HEPA, the Heads of Australia's and New Zealand's EPAs, agreed on the principles for recognising certification schemes, importantly acknowledging the ISO 1702 for the requirements that sets out. Why do practitioners become certified? There's a range of reasons, and I will be sending these slides out after the session today, so I won't go into them in great detail. But it's interesting. There's a real range of reasons, and that's going from the actual benefits for marketability of the person to giving back to the environmental profession and raising standards by setting examples. And you can see there from our survey a couple of years ago on where those lay, and you can see that raising the standard is high up there, and insurance is a really important one, but it's not as important as some of those other ones. But it's definitely a great way to sometimes minimise your premiums. The regulatory demand, it's since 2004's opening, for the best part of the last 15 years or so, different regulators and levels of government have recognised the CEnvP scheme as a place to find your experienced professionals of a certain level, and we can see there that the EPA is requiring it across many states of Australia, and also the New Zealand Ministry for the Environment in some of their site contamination guidelines also identify what is called a CQEP, suitably qualified and experienced person, in New Zealand as the CEnvP SC scheme meeting that standard. And most recently, the New South Wales Government's Department of Planning Environment, under the REAP scheme, the Registered Environmental Assessment Practitioner scheme, has recognised the CEnvP scheme, impact assessment, specialisation plus REAP module as one of the two pathways to gaining to be getting registered as a REAP for their quality framework. Certification types and numbers. Sorry, just catching up on a question. Yes, it is easy to recertify, and if you go to the CEnvP website, you'll find the right certification. Regulators can be certified, and it's really about the reports that are supplied at the time. We'll go into that in a moment. Certification types and numbers. Currently, there's 1,090 certified across Australia, New Zealand, and 13 across the rest of the world. General certification is by far the, and sorry, I'm going to stop for a moment and recognise the South East Queensland ENZ division that have been putting this together for a number of months for members, and then we opened it up to further practitioners and other organisations. And I'd just like to just pause there, and that's why the green Queensland's highlighted, to highlight the amount of certified practitioners, 228 in total across the state. The general certification is by far the largest certification type, followed by the site contamination in the totals there. And then we have a range of certifications for other specialisations, including the ecology impact assessment and the New South Wales REAP impact assessment, geomorphology, climate change, heritage, land rehabilitation. And later this year will be the social impact assessment, where the advisory committee for that group is at a very pointy end of the process. The certifications themselves, for the requirements to become certified, the applicant needs to have, for the general certification, at least 5 years of full-time experience within the last 10 years. And for specialisations, it's 10 years plus experience over the past 15 years or more. For all, a relevant generally environmental related degree, but for specialisations, it gets a bit broader depending on the type of specialisation. A detailed CV. So just touching on a few of these, what we is really important when it comes in, the application gets submitted and comes into the scheme office and then put through to a registrar to review. The CVs are detailed CV is a really great way of getting an overview of the experience of the practitioner. So not simply one that might be downloaded from LinkedIn or elsewhere. With the specialisations, written responses to competencies and proficiencies and supporting evidence. And I'll just jump across to help you find that. So on the CEnvP website, you'll at the top here, you'll have requirements, CEnvP.org, and then you don't need to click, you just hover over that, go to the guidance notes, and then roll down to which one you're most interested in. Click on that. And then, for example, if I clicked on site contamination, it will then bring all the details. These are concertinas that open, and it gives you all the detail relevant to the requirements for that specialisation. So this is that was just a little bit more to support what's required in these reports. And because we have so many certification types, they're all slightly different. So please go to the website and have a look there at our different types of requirements there. All of them require 3 referees, including 1 external to your current place of work, and for the most part, at least, also one of them would be at a level that would be able to obtain, if not already certified under that certification that you're applying for. Also, an important one is the commitment to CPD. When applying, putting together a detailed CPD plan, if you haven't already been collecting CPD, that shows what you have done. So take a bit of time to reflect if it hasn't already been put together over some time, and also what you would be looking to do in the future. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But a CPD is something that once you become certified is a requirement as part of your every 2 years recertification process is submitting a log for the minimum points of the 100 points every 2 years. And that's it's I guess the most essential component of the 2 steps of the recertification process post-certification, and is a very good way for supporting your certification at the beginning. Also, agreements to the ANZ Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct. Again, you can, if you'd like to know what that is, that's available on the website, and you'll find that there. And then also a signed and witnessed statement of claim. So quite similar for both, except one with the specialisation. This section here, there's generally questions that you need to respond to, competencies and proficiencies, and not so much for the general certification. How it works is that certification is a 5-step process, and the first stage is once you've put your application together and you've submitted, is that it then comes into the office at that submission. It's an online form, so you put all you gather your information, you load it all up onto some sort of platforms such as your OneDrive or a share drive that you can you put a URL into the application at the end after collecting all those documents that we can see here, and then pay the fees, hit submit, and then that'll come into the office. The office will check that everything's full, and then may need to come back to you. This component about the referees, and I might just quickly jump back for a second, go back to this referee section here. Wording them up beforehand is a really important component, making sure you've got your 3 referees, and also ensuring that they know that when you hit submit, that there'll be an automated email coming to them to fill in a template, which is kind of pre-filled by the applicant in the application. And then when that lands in, we'll be waiting that your submission will sit there until all that extra referee and work verification reports come in. And once that's all been deemed to be fit, a registrar will then review your application, and then they'll see that it's all there and it's full and it's relevant to the general or the specialist certification. So the relevant registrar, being a specialist in the field, or a general, will or staff will review the general, but with the specialist, the registrar will screen that information, and then they'll determine whether that's been properly made. At that point, if it's not, and this is where it's really helpful to have a detailed CV, and putting in more information is important to ensure that they have gathered all the information. If they kind of feel you're getting to the point of it and you're nearly there, but there's just a few things, they'll then send a list back to the office and just ask for a bit more information, and then the office will reach out to the applicant. It's keeping, for good governance, we keep those involved in the review process away from the applicant for communication purposes. And then if that's all been properly made, then that'll come back to the office, who will then start to look at the interview panel process. Just quickly question the questions. The panel assessment will be what happens at that point is everything's been properly made. The office will then reach out to 3 CEnvPs and at least 2 for that related certification, to then organise a time with the applicant to have an interview online, 2.5 hours or so, to discuss the application. We'll go into this in a tiny bit more detail in a moment. So and then they'll end up with a recommendation for the next stage 4, being the BARC, the Board Application Review Committee, and it's a subset of the board who reviews the panel, reviews the registrar, and then they'll take aboard the views of the panel and then make a formal recommendation to the full board, who then goes on and will ratify, a majority of the board will ratify the outcome of whatever that is, with being approved, deferred, or rejected. Yeah, so it's just looking at the questions. On the website, degree requirements are described as an environmental degree or degree with a substantial environmental requirement will generally constitute the minimum requirements. What degrees generally meet the latter requirements? Do science engineering degrees? Yes, they do. Not an environmental specialist or even meet this. So they're generally looking for someone that there's environmental components. Science and engineering degrees, if they I guess are related, they are. It depends on what the certification is, and also depends on the relevant experience, and that's also a component of it, is the amount of experience in that field. And we recognise that people will have chosen a degree at many years before they're applying for certification. So there is quite an element of variation there, as long as it doesn't, if it's not totally opposite or totally unrelated. Generally, science related degrees are not a problem. When we get to the discussion, we can talk about that also with Joe. So template the referees required to fill it available to share with my referees in advance so they can see what info are required of them. Peter, I'll take that one on notice, actually. I'm not sure if it can be shared before, but it's generally in the application form, there will be, it'll talk to what is required, and also on the website talks to what is required. And it's simply what will be essentially that you've put into your application your name and the time you worked in this, and then so a bit of a description about you will have put in a bit of a description about your role at that organisation and with that person. So then when they receive that, that'll be kind of pre-filled in there. But you can find more about that on the application itself. For specialist site contamination, excellent experience completed overseas, accepted duration of time back out of yes, experience will be accepted, and the main thing is being able to demonstrate that you are able to meet the requirements for the site contam of the NEPM, and demonstrate that with plenty of experience in Australia also. How does X work during PhD study as a work experience for CEnvP general certification? Question, I'll put that one on notice for Joe to handle later. And I'll just move through to certifications of post-step process registrar screening. We'll just have a bit more detail on these two here. Do you need a certain amount of CP points to get general certification? You don't need to have a certain amount, Brittany, but what's really important is to be able to demonstrate what you're wanting to do. Having a plan put together is really helpful. So going back here, these are the most important ones, I guess, for what's in your control, registrar and panel. So your Stage 2 being the assessed by the registrar of the online application. This is all the information that you've put in. So if you're a specialist, it'll be the looking at the competencies, and for everyone, it's looking at ensuring that you're agreeing to the code of commitment, conduct, your commitment to CPD. And again, going to Brittany's question there is about putting a bit of detail into what you have done, or even if you haven't quite done enough so that you'll feel like you've done 100 points over 2 years. It's the way that you're planning it out for next time, or for coming up, how you'll plan out your CPD in the future. It's the work experience verification, so ensuring that everything's full, and the qualifications and referees. So a lot of work goes into not necessarily writing, but it's information gathering, and that information gathering can take a little bit of time because you've got to pull out old degrees. You've got to, put together a CV that's demonstrating your work, and also you have to get things stat-decked and things like that. You'll need to have your qualifications. If you'll be submitting a copy of your degree, having that signed by JOP just as a piece, etc. So the gathering stage is quite a bit of the process, more so than the writing stage. So be prepared to put a bit of investment in time doing that. And then for the second step or the third step being the interview, and this is where the intent of the interview is not a scary process. Intent's not to it's not an interrogation of any way. That's really, they want to ensure that you're suitably qualified, and they want to elicit your experience from you, to try and understand what you have done over your career, and to be able to pull that out. The site contamination is the only one that has a case study, and that case study goes across all the elements of the NEPM and the requirements that are in the guidance notes on the website. And that's about 30 minutes of the overall. And also for all of them, it's really trying to understand your competencies and asking that against your submission, trying to tease out that information. And then there's scenarios for ethical commitment, putting you in a situation. If you're in this situation, how would you react to that situation, type of thing. So there's actually set questions there. Commitment to CPD, and I think we'll talk about that in the next session in a moment. That's a really important one to be able to understand what that is. Your plan for your CPD in the coming years, and also you gain your work experience. And again, they also look at the qualifications, ensuring that they all match up with your work. And then the final stages after that is it goes through to the board application review committee and onto the board for approvals and outcomes. Bit of application advice is I've touched on earlier, ensuring that, well, sure you've got the experience, apply before applying, and it's essentially it's built on full-time equivalent, and that doesn't mean that, and that means that part-timers can definitely apply, and but there's I think one FTE is equal to 35 hours a week over X amount of years, and that's you can find that on our eligibility tools and also on the application form itself. Save as you go. It's just unfortunate the tool that we use, the online application, it's a really good application form, but you need to ensure for it to keep live, you need to save and come back within 30 days. If you don't, you'll need to start again. So it's not a big job. Just make sure you set a reminder or something. If you're going to, for some reason, drop out your application for, not get back to it for a while, it's just to make sure you log in, you get back in and you save again within 30 days. But hopefully you'll be completing it within that period of time. Contact your referees, as we were discussing before, and detailed CV. The more detail that you put in, it makes it easier for the registrar to understand your skills and experience, and also the detailed CPD plan. And then a newly certified practitioner receives the certificate there. With that one's for site contamination. Specifically, you get to use this post-nominal CEnvP and the specialist one of specialist. There's an electronic seal, which will be of, for example, this one here, the site contamination. That'll have an expiry date. It'll be the financial year, and that goes when submitting reports, and can be used on your documentation, which is relevant to you only, not for an organisation. You get listed on the directory, and then obviously status as being determined by your peers. Further details, please head to CEnvP.org. Everything's on there. We try and keep that as full as possible. Also questions at info@, and also the phone number. Follow us on the CEnvP scheme LinkedIn. We do weekly posts on there. Also, I'd like to add that the SEQ EINZ division is considering holding a face-to-face interactive session for actually the application requirements. So please email them if you'd like to work through that with others at the time, and and the CEnvP program office will be supporting the division with that also. The SEQ division's also holding Being an Environmental Professional, the ethical dimension in practice on the 4th of October. Head to that. You'll find that on the EINZ website under the South East Queensland events. And we're going to now head to the insights on certification with our group, and I'll have a look at this one, Peter, and answer it in the chat as I move through to the next section, which is Joe Flint, Luke Amies, and Julie Keane will be having a discussion on a Q&A and with some questions. Thanks, Joe. I will go on mute and stop sharing.
Great, thanks very much, Paul. That was a really good rundown on the scheme and also the application process, and Paul and the staff at the office are absolutely fantastic. So at any time, if you can't get what you need from the website, please don't hesitate to contact them if you're after further questions or information on the scheme. So thanks, I welcome everyone too. Thanks for joining us. It's great to have your interest in the scheme, and we really wanted this part of the session to be focused on the questions you have and to give you some insights into being at CEnvP, what's been some motivations for others, as well as their experiences with the application process. So to just give you a feel for what others have been through, and maybe some tips as well along the way. So I'd like to also thank Julie Keane and Luke Amies, who are both CEnVPs who have kindly agreed to join me for this part of the session to have a discussion on some of those insights. And we'll bring them in on questions in the moment. But firstly, just popping back to a few questions that have come up from Paul's session, which Paul's answered most of those along the way. Thanks, Paul. But just cutting across to a bit more discussion on some of those. So firstly, Sally Ann, look, they're all great questions. Thanks, everyone. And if there are further questions, keep them coming in while we have this discussion. Sally Ann, great question on being a regulator and being a certified practitioner. And the answer is absolutely yes. As Paul said, we're not confined to any particular type of job or experience level. So, you know, it's meant to be about the individual, their needs, the benefits the certification can bring to them. And so we have applicants from obviously consultancy, from regulatory bodies, from industry, so people embedded within corporations, etc., research organisations, academia. We have applicants from all sorts of areas where they see the value and need for their certification. So absolutely open. Recertification, if you've let it lapse, absolutely no problem. And, you know, if it hasn't been, if it's only been a short period since relapse, give the office a call and they'll see what can be done in that regard. But otherwise, the process is the same for reapplying. And absolutely, we have lots of regulators who are currently regulators and are certified practitioners. So thanks for that question.
Just maybe Jo's in a remote part of Western Australia. I think she's on an island off the south coast somewhere. See if that connection comes back. Jo, if you can hear me, maybe try by just turning your camera off as well. While we're waiting, I will throw in a question first to Julie. Why did you decide to become a CEnvP?
Thanks, Paul. Thank you, everyone. I became a CEnvP in 2014, so it's a very long time ago, and you know, I'm getting on a bit now, so remembering it back that far is a little bit difficult. But at the time, I was a consultant, and recognition of the skills that EIA specialists have, and also the opportunity to advance the profession was really the two things that I found important. And I think that's over the years is growing. When I registered, it was quite in the early days. I can't remember when it first actually started, Paul. You might be able to remind me. But so I think that opportunity to actually advance the profession and have people recognise that it is a specialist activity doing environmental assessment, and also the other specialisations, obviously. So yeah, that's really probably why I did it, and I continue, and that's why I sort of continue in the SEAC and working on the panels and things again as a regulator. And that query, you know, as in relation to being a regulator, I've gone from the dark side. I moved from consulting into regulating, and have maintained my CEnvP. So yes, you certainly can do it on both sides of the fence.
Thanks, Julie. 2004, the scheme started, and the same for yourself, Luke. Luke Ames, I'd like to introduce. He's a site contamination specialist.
Thanks, Paul, and good afternoon, everyone. I think for me, it's much the same, really. The contam land industry obviously does have a number of regulatory requirements to be able to demonstrate your skills, and I think the slides that Paul put up earlier highlighted some of those jurisdictions which I do operate in as well. So part of the reason behind looking towards certification was just to enable me to fulfill some of those requirements, particularly in relation to the regulatory frameworks that we operate under. My primary business is in Queensland, which doesn't actually have that specific recognition required, but it certainly does help in demonstrating acting as a suitably qualified person under the Queensland legislation. It's certainly a lot easier to demonstrate that having the certification under your belt as well. I think the other aspect really was to just, it's something that I've chosen to specialise in as a career in contaminated land, and part of it was even just the challenge of demonstrating my skill and my competency in that, and being able to guess take that point of self-reflection to go, well, do I actually meet the level of certification that would allow me to obtain that certification, and having that external industry process to be able to go, well, actually, yeah, I can actually demonstrate to myself and to others. And there is work involved in applying for the specialist scheme, but it's a good point of actually reflecting on your career and making sure that you do satisfy the various requirements and can demonstrate that you are a specialist in a particular industry.
Paul, thanks for jumping in when I lost connection. Bad timing. Paul and I did talk about Plan B. I'm over in WA, and connection can be a bit of a problem at times, but just at the wrong time. But thanks all. Yeah, and just great comments from Luke and Julie. And just reflecting on myself quickly, I'm a general practitioner, so I'm a career generalist, so I've chosen to stay as a general practitioner my whole career, and I found, for me, it was important to acknowledge amongst my peers, similar to how Luke indicated with his site contamination specialty, that there was ability to have an independent set of peers acknowledge my skills and experience. I also, and this going back to another question from Amanda about the degrees. My degree is actually in engineering from a very long way back. And so at that stage in my studies, there wasn't anything called environmental engineering or similar. So I wasn't able to select that as a specific field during my studies, but certainly my work took me straight to those areas. And so it was great to have that engineering degree acknowledged as being a suitable base for being a good practitioner in the environmental area through additional skills gathered throughout work and further studies later. But yes, so there's all sorts of different pathways you can come to and different reasons that meet your need. As I got later into my career and I had teams of environmental professionals working for me and I was their manager, the certification also allows me to show my more junior work colleagues that there was career pathways for acknowledging their skills and experience as well, and it was a very important aspect for me as manager to maintain my certification for that reason as well. So there's all sorts of motivations. Anything further that Luke or Julie would like to add to Amanda's question about the basis in qualifications for certification? You've had your own experiences as well as seen through panel interviews, people with different backgrounds. Is there anything you'd like to add on that?
Yeah, certainly. My bachelor degree's in urban and regional planning. So I don't technically have, I then have an environmental law degree as well. So but all of my work experience is in impact assessment. So it is, doesn't immediately, that was one of the things when I was first looking to apply, question was, well, if I've got this degree, can I get it? Can I qualify? And the answer was yes. So it is also, a degree that is relevant, which urban and regional planning has some relevance, and law obviously has some relevance from a statutory perspective, but it's also very much about the experience that people have and being able to demonstrate that.
I think for me that's probably the key point, that there's a lot of different places that people can come from and different pathways, but one of the key aspects of the application process is just being able to demonstrate the relevance of that to the requirements of the scheme. So the scheme's been set up in accordance with a range of specific requirements. There's reference to relevant guidance as well. I know certainly for I think it's Schedule B9 of the NEPM lists out a number of requirements at that national level, which the scheme has incorporated into the process as well. So being able to link your experience or your qualifications to what is relevant to meet whichever certification you're going through is it can be a challenge, but I guess that's where we need the applicant to demonstrate how they think that meets the requirement of the scheme.
Yeah, thanks, Luke and Julie. Some really good points there. And then further on to Christian's question, we also do have many applicants who have had beyond graduate studies as part of their background prior to certification through research work through masters or PhD programs or other research bodies that are out there and operate and provide terrific experience for practitioners as well. So absolutely those experiences are considered when we look at the overall work experience criteria for an applicant, and we have many people who have got through with relevant PhD research or master's research experience as part of their work experience totals to meet the criteria. We might now jump just to back to Julie and Luke to see if they can give us any tips based on their own experiences. Luke was certified in 2018, still some years ago, but might have some recall some things that worked well for him. So we'll go to that one first. Thanks, Luke.
Thanks, Joe. I think the big one for me, and Paul touched on this in the thing, is the 30-day limit on the application. I actually got caught out by that. That I went away from my application for a bit and came back and all the data had been wiped. So my hot tip on that is actually I actually then worked offline and sort of I guess had an Excel Word document where I as time permitted worked on my application to pull together my experience and then was able to, I guess, copy that across into the application when I was ready. But I think giving the busy work schedule that we all have and personal commitments, it was sort of a bit of time here, a bit of time there to pull the application together. So I'd strongly encourage people to actually keep that as a standalone document if you could, and it comes in handy as well, having that resource saved just for your personal use as well. I think the other thing too is just being prepared, particularly for the interview process. The requirements are fairly well spelt out in terms of what you need to be able to demonstrate, and I guess what to expect as part of that interview process. It's really about being able to demonstrate the skills and the expertise which you've already put in your application. So particularly for the specialist application, you're providing documentation to support how you meet the various qualifications and requirements. So being able to talk to those examples, and they should be examples that you know well because you've completed that work and you've already then written applications. So being able to draw on them and explain. But I think Paul mentioned the interview process it's not a scary process, and you're being assessed by a bunch of peers who have been through the process themselves. So they're aware of what's required, but the intention really is to draw out your expertise and knowledge. So they're there to guide you through the process. They do have a specific task to do, and they certainly can't answer the questions for you. But they're not. It's not a difficult process. Just come prepared and be led by the interviewers in terms of what sort of information they're looking for to address the specific requirements of that interview process.
Right, thanks, Luke. Yeah.
And I think the only other point would be, and again, Paul mentioned would be your referees. So making sure that they are clued up. Once the application goes in, there is an automated email that goes out, and furthering your application is dependent on their response. So I have seen a few applications that have been stalled because one of their referees has gone on holidays or something like that and hasn't or lost the email and hasn't responded, and he sort of a month or two down the track and nothing's happened. So making sure that your referees are clued up, but also available and around when you do actually hit the submission.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Luke. And then from you, Julie, because I know you've done quite a few panel interviews in recent years, and sort of thinking about Brittany's question on CPD as well. Would you be able to talk to that as well as any other tips from panels?
I suppose first of all, it sounds as though I dodged a bullet. I was applied pre having to do it online, so didn't lose any data. So that was good, and it was also pre having to write an essay about your key proficiencies. So those are the things that I suppose have changed over the years. CPD is, I mean, as Luke said, the interview is not scary. Although, you know, sometimes some people might think it is, but we try not to make it too scary. I did one yesterday, and it's more just about, you know, having a bit of a conversation, and that's what I try to do. But one of the things I find regularly when we do the interviews is, you know, we'll ask people about their CPD, what they have been doing, what they plan to do. And a lot of the time, you know, they don't really have a good plan. And as Paul said, it is important that you do. And the other thing that people often don't really quite recognise or understand is that CPD must be relevant to the profession and to your specialisation. I often have people say, "Oh, trying to think of an example now that I won't be able to." You know, doing some volunteer work for a housing association, which is not necessarily relevant to impact assessment or something like that. Yes, it's nice that you're doing that, but yeah, it doesn't really count. And also, you know, thinking that, well, you know, doing things there is actually, and this Joanne and I spoke about this yesterday, there is actually a little bit of need for a better definition, I think, of what does and doesn't qualify from, you know, when you're doing internal training at your workplace, does that qualify? So, and different things like that. So having a clear understanding of what CPD requirements there are, and being very aware that it is, you know, you've got to work at it in terms of it's something you can't just leave till the last minute and crank up your 100 points. So that's something that we ask about in the panel assessment, and people generally haven't really thought about that. So it's important.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. Yeah, it is a commitment. So, you know, you need to think about it seriously in terms of the ability to fit that in to your other program and activities, both work and personal, in the next period of certification. So, yeah, luckily it's becoming more accessible now, CPD, with the pandemic certainly given us a lot more options for accessing CPD, which is great. That meets the needs of the scheme. We've got a question in from Peter too, and thanks, Paul, for answering Peter's question on the referees and work verifiers. But there's another question from Peter on where do we see the future of certification going with respect to government employee industry expectations? Do we see it becoming a prerequisite? Yeah, well, it's a little bit of the crystal ball stuff gazing there, Peter, and it's a great question. The board and Paul, we work all the time strategically in this area, trying to understand what the future does look like with respect to further need in government, industry, etc. We have a number of stakeholders that Paul continuously engages with in the government sector, but also other stakeholders. For example, a couple of years ago, Paul did a piece of work with another not-for-profit group who were working to improve impact assessment in the mining industry, and that's a potential way that industry could set the standard there rather than government. So we do work across a number of stakeholders for ensuring that we're on top of and understanding what's coming. We also, you know, through our parent organisation, EINZ. Of course, there's a lot of advocacy done with governments around the need for better environmental protection, one prong of which may be through better certification of those professionals that serve that need. So that's something that we kept abreast of through EINZ and other organisations we work with. So yeah, there's no set answer to you there, but please be assured that we strategically think about it all the time. We get approached by different organisations to help with new certification products, so we're looking at that all the time. So and the team does a fantastic job in that. Is there anything you wanted to add on that one, Paul?
While you were answering that, Jo, I went to our survey, which we had about 200 or 220 responses last year, and it was exactly that question: as you know, are you seeing demand for it in your workplace? You're seeing demand for it in the industry, and it's a roughly 50-50 split. About 100 have said yes, and about 90 something have said no across both of those responses. So yes and no.
Yeah, no, great. Yeah, no, great. So yeah, our surveys are also a great source of data for trends coming up. So that's a great point, Paul. Thanks. Well, we're approaching the end of our time together, conscious that people in their working days and may have 1 o'clock meetings, so we won't go over time. I'd really like to thank all our presenters for coming along. Paul, excellent presentation on the scheme, and we really appreciate that level of detail and support that you provide to future applicants and those interested in the scheme. Julie and Luke, thanks so much for offering your insights. I think we could have talked for another hour and shared a lot more and learnt more about our perspectives, but you know, it's been wonderful having you and being able to answer the questions through your own experiences. Thanks to the attendees for the great questions too. They were terrific, driving the discussion. And just a reminder that as Paul mentioned, there's if people would be interested in a more face-to-face session, probably in Brisbane, please do contact that SEQ EINZ email, because if we get sufficient interest, we will look to program something. The SEQ division of EINZ will look to program something into the future, in the near future, and look for Paul's and other staff support for that. And just a second reminder about a relevant CPD session that might, for those interested in certification, the ethical part may be of interest to you in more detail in that workshop on the 4th of October. So thanks again to everybody, and I hope you all have a good afternoon, and bye for now.
Thanks all. Appreciate you coming.